Our first guest in this series is an advertising guru you'd recognise from the Gruen transfer. She's a columnist in the Sunday Life. She's a feminist commentator. She's unlikely to be on Alan Jones's Christmas card list after spearheading the Destroy the Joint movement. And she's also an author of many books, including a series of young adult books about the Virgin Queen. And it's her interest in that particular topic that we are going to be discussing tonight. Please welcome Jane Caro.
Thank you.
Now, Jane, you're a staunch Republican and you have a passion for one of Britain's most famous royals. How did that start?
I don't really know. I don't remember a time when I wasn't obsessed with Elizabeth I. So, when I was 5 or 6, I thought she was amazing. And I think...
You grew up in the UK, so you would have been living there at the time.
Well, we came here when I was 5, just before I turned 6. So, I call myself Australian by choice and English by accident. But I think there were some old encyclopedias in my bedroom when I was young, and I loved reading. And I used to get these. I think they were printed around 1900, and I used to get them out of the wardrobe that was in my room and read them at night. And I skipped all the geography and anything to do with maths or science, which bored the crap out of me, and tragically still does. And I would read the myths and legends, but also the stories of great, particularly women. And I think that may be where I first read, one of those little encyclopedic entries about Elizabeth I. And I was just so captivated by the idea that here was a woman who was a hero and who was acknowledged as a hero. And when I was young, and I think it's still true, those are bloody thin on the ground. We're offered two alternatives. The saintly, self-sacrificing one who comes to a sticky end. Back in my childhood, Nurse Edith Cavell. The older women.
So there's a lot of people nodding. For those of us that are sitting there going, of course, Nurse Edith, I don't know.
No, that's right.
Who is Nurse Edith
Well,
Cavell?
she was a nurse in the First World War and she was shot as a spy, and it was all very tragic. And then there's like Joan of Arc, who died in flames and all that kind of stuff. And then your other alternative are the heinous bitches, the Catherine the Greats and the Livias from ancient Rome. And there's virtually nobody in between. And then there's this little beacon of Elizabeth I. And it just made me go, there is hope. Women can do things in the world, because here's one who did.
Here's one who did. So she is your hero.
Yes.
And so, this has been a consistent thing from the time, I've changed my heroes probably every couple of years, I reckon, since childhood. So I'm really fascinated by the fact that you found this thing and you stuck with it. Now, you're about to publish your third book about Queen Elizabeth?
No.
Or you're writing the third one?
Can I just say, well, let's put it this way. If you buy lots of copies of the second one, I will get to publish the third one.
And don't go to Wikipedia
pressure.
and find out what happens, okay?
Yeah,
no
that's
spoilers
right.
about what happens with Elizabeth I. Did you always know that you wanted to write about her, or was it just a general interest?
No, it's just a general interest, and I would read everything that came out about her. I watched all the films and TV series.
What's the best one in your opinion?
Oh, the Glenda Jackson TV series, for sure. Absolutely brilliant.
Better than Cate Blanchett?
Yes, better than Cate Blanchett.
You were one of the people that cheered for Gwyneth when she won, weren't you?
No. No, I've never cheered for Gwyneth Paltrow ever.
Well, so with the book then, where did the seeds plant? When did they start planting in your brain that you were going to write a book about Queen Elizabeth?
Well, unfortunately, it's not a very romantic. It's an incredibly pragmatic and self-interested story. But I'll tell you, I went to a writing group, and I was writing, trying to write literary novels.
And when was
they
this?
Were shithouse. Oh, probably the 90s.
Yep.
They were shithouse, basically. And there was one woman in our writing group who was writing a novel set in the wars between Rome and the Etruscans, the Romans and the Etruscans. And she got some interest. And she was the first one in our writing group who got some interest from a literary agent. And we were all absolutely eaten up with goddamn envy. The rest of us are really, really deeply pissed off. Although we all said, oh, wow, Lisa, how fantastic. But we were really lying. And but it did make me think that and it's always been a dream of my life to have a novel published. It was kind of one of those things that I wanted to do. And I thought, well, if I'm going to get a novel published, it looks to me, put your marketing hat on, Jane, be sensible, that genre novels are the way to go. That's where you seem to get the most traction. in terms of interest from publishers. And so I thought, what genre could I write?
Vampires. No, they'll never work.
Yeah. No, I wasn't... Vampires didn't come into it. I thought detective fiction. I thought, no, I'm not clever enough. I won't come up with plots. That's not going to work. I thought, science fiction. No, I couldn't give a shit. I thought romantic fiction. I thought, no, I'd rather kill myself. And then I thought historical. I could do historical. I really like history. Love anything historical. And then I thought, you're going to have to research a lot for history, which put me off for a while. But then I thought, who could I research and bear to live with for a long period of time? And it was obvious then, Elizabeth I. And then I got this idea of writing it in, which is really, really arrogant and arsey of me. There is no doubt that this is true, that I decided I wanted to write it in her voice because she's appeared as a character in other novels and, obviously in films and things. But we always see her from the outside. And what I'd always imagined when I thought about her was what would it have felt like to be her? Like what would it have been like to be that young girl and then that queen and then the elderly woman in that incredibly misogynistic society in which she lived? And so that's what I started doing.
Well, I mean, by doing so, by writing the books from the perspective of Elizabeth, you have made her this historical figure. You've humanised her so much that she's instantly relatable even 400 years after her death, which is kind of an amazing thing to do. How did you get into that headspace, and what were the kind of resources that you had to go to do that?
Well, I thought getting her voice would be the hardest thing. I thought, oh my God, you've really set yourself a task. You'll probably completely stuff it up. And then I thought, well, don't worry about that. Just write the first chapter. And so I wrote it, and I took it into my writing group in fear and trepidation, and I read it out loud, which is what we did. And they all looked at me and said, well, that's the best thing you've ever done. Which says a lot about how bad the rest of my shit was.
I like that that's a compliment that sounds like a little bit of an insult, which sort of...
Yeah.
Which I'm sure it wasn't meant to be. But.
Well, but it encouraged me to keep going. All I needed was a little crumb. And in fact, the voice came quite easily. I don't know why. It just suddenly, I just thought to myself, here is the first book that I wrote starts with her 25 years old in the Tower of London. It's historically accurate. That's where she was the night before she was to be crowned Queen of England. And the Tower of London, of course, is where she spent a year as a prisoner of her sister Mary Tudor in real fear for her life. And it's also where her father executed her mother, just down on the lawn. And so my conceit was that she would not be able to sleep, and that to pass the night she would think back over her life and think, how did I survive? What have I learnt? And how on earth am I going to do this job? And so the way to write it, it seemed to me, was not to do a lot of prithys and, whither? Yonder is the castle of my father the king stuff. Not a lot of that. But just formal language, a different kind of meditative pace, and no colloquialisms. And that seemed to just start to flow. And actually that was the easiest part of doing it. The research, I used secondary sources. I'm not a historian. So I wasn't going to the actual... I'm not trying to unearth new historical evidence about Elizabeth I, which is what a serious historian would do. So I went to secondary sources, all sorts of them, and sort of mapped out her life and all that kind of thing. I did go to the UK, and I did visit an exhibition which was on at Greenwich about Elizabeth I, which had all sorts of artefacts of hers actually there on display. So the letters she wrote when she was begging for her life from Mary Tudor, when she's about to be sent to her sister, which is about to be sent to the Tower, where she wrote as much as she could, and then she's had all this space at the bottom, and she was frantic because she thought someone will forge something at the bottom of that which could... So she cross-hatches the whole of the bottom of the letter between the last line of what she's saying and her signature right on the bottom, so that no one can put anything in there, which gives you a real sense of her. The ring she wore, which had a secret compartment, which had a picture of Anne Boleyn in the secret compartment. Now, she never spoke of Anne Boleyn that we know of, but she wore this ring. Her gloves, her leather gauntlet. So there was all this wonderful, rich, evocative stuff.
And I would imagine that seeing something like that in front of you takes the idea of a queen and it makes it something so very tangible and accessible. did you just get home that night at the hotel?
Yeah, pretty much. And of course, I went to see Hatfield House and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I mean, to actually see those little objects which remain of hers, it just makes you realise this was a real person, because she's so often presented as a brand, you know, with the big ruff and the kind of stiff white face, and it's all very iconic rather than a human being.
What can feminists learn from Elizabeth I?
Well, I mean, Elizabeth I applied her intelligence to her life, which is a very rare thing still for women to do. Women are encouraged, not because women are stupid, but because women are encouraged not to do it. It's seen as cold, calculating, heartless. We are expected to allow our heart to rule our head. We're expected to think that to be loved is the most important thing in the world. Elizabeth I didn't think any of those things.
Which is understandable given the examples that she would have had in her life.
Exactly. If your father cuts your mother's head off, you're not so convinced that love is really a great thing to be going for.
Or everyone's literally losing their life through childbirth. You would then associate, well, then I don't know that that's a good, or being betrayed by male partners.
Absolutely. She knew if she married, which was what everyone expected her to do, it was what was considered to be the natural trajectory. Her duty was to bear sons. That's really what everyone expected her to do. But she knew that if she married, she would have to hand over power to her husband. Well, why would she want to do that? Also, if she had a son, incredibly dangerous, not thought about by the men at the time, but the son, would immediately become the focus of everyone, because it was seen as more natural that a man should be on the throne. Mary, Queen of Scots, I think, probably lost her head in the long run because she gave birth to James VI of Scotland, James I of England, because everybody went, oh, good, the old bat's had a baby, it's a boy, we're much more interested in him than we are in her. And I think Elizabeth had the clarity of mind which came from a very dangerous youth and childhood, and also from being an outsider. The contrast between Elizabeth I and Mary Queen of Scots is that Mary Queen of Scots had a pampered, indulged childhood in the French court. Elizabeth I was neglected, dismissed, lonely, pretty loveless, really, apart from paid attendants, who I think did definitely love her and stayed with her all her life, but they're still paid attendants, you know. The differences between those two women in terms of what they expected out of life and how much Elizabeth felt she had to think carefully about everything and work it out for herself. And I think that's why my theory, no proof, is that's why she's the reason feminism arose in the English-speaking world first. Mary Wollstonecraft was the first person to really enunciate it, and I think her model gave intellectual, intelligent, clear-minded women something to hold on to, a model.
My question about how Elizabeth made those choices, but I guess making those choices is just the beginning of the journey if you want to survive in that era, because I mean, obviously, things aren't great for women in the 1500s. They're possibly vaguely better for you maybe if you're a noble woman. At the same time, it's a pretty dangerous course that you need to navigate. So it's one thing to make the decision, I'm not going to get married and I'm not going to have children, but then you have an entire court, I would imagine, that is absolutely expecting you to do those things. And it's not something that you can just probably announce, well, no. So how did she navigate through that kind of minefield?
Well, she said no consistently. She constantly said no.
But did she come up with excuses, or was it just
she would say, I'm married to my people. She would say things like, I would rather be a single beggar maid than a married queen. She was pretty explicit. But all the blokes just thought, oh, isn't she lovely and modest and virginal saying those things? So charming that she pretends she doesn't want to marry one of us. They just didn't take her seriously until she started to get older, particularly when she nearly died of smallpox quite quickly in her, like only a few years into her reign. And of course the real stress was her heir was a Catholic, and of course we're in the middle of the Protestant Reformation, so there's real religious tensions and rivalries going on at the same time, which complicated everything. she nearly died and the pressure was enormous. It is your duty to give us an heir. That's the stability of the throne. She's one human woman. People died all the time.
Yeah.
At that, death was with them constantly. She never gave in though. And she'd say to them, I'm not going to do it. And they go, yeah, you will. You will, of course you will. Don't be silly. I think she may have nearly married Robert Dudley, who was the man that she definitely loved all of her life. But then his wife, he was already married when they were flirting. They were flirting.
God, you don't need to go on. I think I found the impediment in that plan.
Well, yes, she was, but then it got worse because then she died in very mysterious circumstances. She was found with a broken neck at the bottom of a stairs. And suspicion immediately fell on Robert Dudley that he had killed her. But she actually had probably breast cancer. She'd been complaining of a malady of the breast, so she probably had tumours in her breast, and that she was very, very sick. So, in fact, it didn't really make sense that Robert Dudley would kill her because they kind of knew that if they just hung around for a bit longer, she'd die naturally. She may have committed suicide. It's one of those unsolved mysteries. Nobody knows what happened. But by her death, that meant they could never marry, because if they did, everyone would think that they had colluded to murder this woman so that they could marry. And so by dying, she actually made it impossible.
Well played, Mrs. Dudley.
Yes, slightly hard on her, but hey.
But worth it.
Yeah. She won.
She won. So what was life like for women of Elizabeth's era that maybe weren't up at her ranking, maybe for everyone else? And I know it sounds like an obvious question, but I'm assuming this is some part of the research that you would have gone into as well.
It was awful. There's no question about it. They were basically property. So you were the property of your father. Then when you married, you were the property of your husband. You had almost no... When the Catholic Church had been in charge, there had been the possibility of becoming a nun. That was another path that people could take.
The fun path, if you didn't want that uptight.
That was the really... I think I'll be a nun. But once that had gone, basically your future was bound up with whatever man you married. I guess if you were fortunate, you married a nice, gentle man who treated you well, and you had good enough hips to give birth reasonably easily, and you might get to live a reasonable life. But most women, I don't think that's what happened. I think they died in agony, in childbirth, constantly. Elizabeth watched two of her stepmothers die, Jane Seymour and Catherine Parr. Both died as a result of childbirth. There's a reason there's so many stepmothers in fairy tales, because mothers died, and they died giving birth.
I just never thought of that. I just had a penny drop moment. Like, you're right. That is probably why there's so many stepmothers in fairy tales. I want to ask you about, and it's not like a main plot of your book at all. It's just something historical that I didn't know had happened, which is her sister Mary. Did she have a ghost baby?
She had a phantom pregnancy.
Phantom pregnancy?
You couldn't make this shit up, really, could you?
And that's crazy. Like, I was reading this book and I'm like, okay, Jane, you've taken a few liberties, but Wikipedia backed you up. Uh-huh. So, because basically, like, Mary is queen and she's pregnant and everyone's like, woohoo, we're having an heir. And then time ticks on and she still stays out to there, but no baby comes.
No baby.
That's a crazy story. I hope I haven't ruined it for everyone. Can you tell me a little bit more about it?
Well, poor old Mary Tudor, who's one of the saddest figures in history, I think, and she's often treated in the Elizabeth story as a bit of a heinous bitch, Bloody Mary is the title often given to her, but I don't treat it harshly. I think she was caught by history like Elizabeth was, and she didn't have Elizabeth's talents. So poor old Mary, she was a much more conventional woman. She wanted to marry, she wanted to have children, that was what she really wanted. And she wanted to marry Philip of Spain because her mother was Spanish, and it was a tribute to her mother who she mourned all her life. And Philip of Spain, not to put too fine a point on it, was an absolute arsehole. And he married her and he made horrible remarks about how old and ugly she was. But anyway...
It's called negging if you've read the game.
Yeah. But he manages to do his duty. And she, almost perhaps through sheer force of will, her periods stop. She's 38, 39 when this happens. Her periods stop. She... belly swells. The doctors say yes, she even claims she felt the quickening, which is when the baby starts to move. All of this was happening. Everything was going as it should. Elizabeth, of course, is thinking, well, what the bloody hell's going to happen to me then? She keeps thinking, though, lots of people die in childbirth. Anything could happen. And Mary goes off because they used to confine them for the last 3 months, so they would absolutely go into kind of purdah. They would not be seen.
And why is that? Just because, fat chicks, no fat chicks kind of rule,
Well,
but also the 1500s?
I think it's too confronting to see the results of sexuality. Nobody talked about sex. Well, if you're walking around with a great big belly in front of you, clearly you've had sex. So they hide it away. It's hidden away. And she was only with women. So, and they would bring food to her and all this kind of stuff. And the weird thing is the court went into a kind of frozen state because she's the queen. She's not the queen consort. She's the actual ruling monarch. So nothing can happen. Nothing can happen because they don't know if she's going to have a son, is she going to live? Everything freezes. And Philip and Elizabeth get to know each other at the court waiting for this baby to be born. And everyone's expecting the baby at a certain point. And exactly as you say, the court stays frozen for another month and another month and another month. And everyone starts to go, don't think she's pregnant. And eventually the poor woman has to emerge from this confinement and kind of pretend that none of this has happened because it's so humiliating. Yeah. And probably she may have had some sort of tumour. She died a few years later, so it may in fact have been a cancerous growth rather than a pregnancy. It's one of the saddest stories, I think, in history. And Mary Tudor, very flawed woman in lots of ways, but such a sad life. Elizabeth actually had a pretty good life, one of the best of women of her time. Her sister Mary, really awful.
And what happens for Elizabeth then when she emerges?
Well, she's won. She's still the heir to the throne. So, and that's Mary's great defeat because Mary wants England to be Catholic, which is what she is. Elizabeth is a Protestant heir and also the daughter of the woman that Mary Tudor hates most in the world, Anne Boleyn. So this is really a thorn in her side. And when she thought she was having a baby, she thought, God has blessed me. He is going to make England Catholic and we're going to have a Catholic dynasty because my child will be heir and that dreadful Protestant whore's daughter will not be anywhere near here. And, of course, when it all turns out to be a fantasy, Elizabeth is triply triumphant over poor Mary. It's awful.
I think Phantom Baby is my new, terrified personal.
Yeah.
I just don't want to get phantom babied.
No.
It's really weirded me out. I knew it existed, but I think reading it in the novel just made me go, oh.
Ultrasounds can help.
Yeah. It's not God's will for me to go to a doctor. I'm just going to get the vibe, feel some quickening, and I'll go from there. So what for you are the main themes of the book, other than obviously just telling Elizabeth's story from her perspective, but what are the greater themes that you're kind of sharing in it?
Well, I think it's a model, again, of that thing of being not letting your heart rule your head and that women do not need support from a man. They are not incomplete without a partner. Now I have a partner. I've been married for 40 years. I'm not against having partners. But it's that idea that women is sort of half-formed unless they're married. So the theme of this book is here is a whole person. Here is a whole person who is ruling a country, who is doing a very good job of ruling a country, who is able to impress all those men who really thought that women just a little bit above possibly farm animals in terms of their capacity. She is able to impress these men to such an extent that the Pope at the time, who issued a fatwa against Elizabeth, which really meant, and it was a fatwa, he didn't call it that, it was a papal bull, which said any Catholic who kills the Queen of England, not only is it not a sin, they will go directly to heaven. Well, that's exactly what happens now when, they want to kill Salman Rushdie or whoever.
I nearly killed him in London once. It was an accident.
Yeah.
I was
You'd have gone straight to heaven.
Yeah, I was walking down the street and I bumped into him and knocked him accidentally a little bit into traffic. And then I looked over and I'm like, that's Salman Rushdie. Did I miss out on some money here?
No money, just 72 virgins, I think.
I'm sure
one
they
of
have
whom might have been Elizabeth. But that Pope who issued the fatwa against her also said, she is the most remarkable person in Christendom. She is, if only she was of the right religious persuasion, she would be the greatest ever, but she is amazing. So there was admiration even from her enemies. And to earn respect as a female on her own, the theme of this book is really about the struggle that was, how scary that was, because great people, I don't think, ever think they're great. They're just as insecure and just as overwhelmed and bewildered as anybody else. It's how they respond to being overwhelmed and bewildered that makes them great. And she didn't really have much choice. I mean, this was her path and she just grasped it with both hands. And her constant application of her genius to her own situation, her ability to sacrifice things, to say, no, I can't marry that man because if I do, I will put myself in great danger and I will also put my kingdom at risk. And she was the beginning of the kind of phlegmatic, tolerant tradition of the English. She said things like, I don't want to make a window into men's souls. In other words, I don't care what people believe inside. Just obey the law. Just, do what you've got to do on the surface, but I'm not into wanting you to believe anything different. You can be yourself. Or the other thing she said, which I loved, which is, there is but one Lord Jesus, the rest is a dispute over trifles. So she had this really, I think the major theme is a realistic, clear-eyed, really smart, really brave, really strong, but very human, very flawed person. She wrote great poems, some of which were very wry and self-aware. She had a great sense of humour. She was incredibly charismatic. The major theme of this is, here is a woman to be respected and admired. She was formidable. She was so formidable that we have not been able to disappear her from history, and almost all other great women have either been limited or literally forgotten. She was so extraordinary, and I want girls to know about her. I want boys to know about her too, but I particularly want girls to.
And this book is a young adult book. Now, it doesn't... I don't read many young adult books on purpose or not on purpose. I just never I don't go out seeking them.
No.
And I wouldn't have picked this up and read it and thought that I was reading a book for teenagers. I didn't feel like I was sort of, it was a rollicking read. Why was it sold under young adult?
Well, there's no sex in it.
Is that literally it? That there's no sex in it, so it's young adult?
I think there's a lot to that, yeah.
Wow.
It's also, young adult is the most successful genre at the moment. That's where all the big sales are. There's no sex in it, so a lot of the religious schools are going to be very happy with the book. There's no controversy about it. The history is very accurate.
There's some sexy tickle scenes with an uncle.
There's a little bit of sexual tension.
Yeah.
But nothing actually happens. So I think that helps in the young adult market. And of course, publishers look at where you're going to be able to sell it, and that's where they thought it would sell, and I think they were right. And the other thing is the history is accurate. So when I was a girl, I loved authors like Jean Plady, and I learnt so much of my history from those novels, which really turned history into real stories. I mean, there was a wonderful one called Desiree about the woman who nearly married Napoleon and ended up starting the Swedish dynasty, which is a royal dynasty, which is an incredible story and true. And so I loved all of that as a girl myself, and I learnt my history that way. So I knew that by doing this, the history would be absorbed by young people. And I think parents and teachers and school librarians and principals know that too. So it does make sense that it's young adult. But I didn't set out to write a young adult book.
Yeah, because I always wonder, like, it almost, when you hear people talk about, like, young adult novels, if you don't read them, you would have this idea that, like,
They're a bit
dumbed down,
Yeah.
a bit simplified, but they're really not in this day and age at all. They're just, I guess, sort of PG, maybe? Is that literally it?
I actually think it is a bit PG. I think adult literature now, you got to have a bit of hot sex in there, otherwise it doesn't qualify, which is a bit sad. I think Jane Eyre, if it was written now, for example, would be classified young adult.
That's a really interesting discussion, like classic books from history that we would now never dismiss as anything other than just a great novel, but if they were to be marketed now, where we would file them.
Jane Austen could well find herself writing now young adult.
Wow, that's crazy. So when you're penning it, you're just thinking, I'm writing a book about Elizabeth I.
Absolutely.
Boom.
I didn't think about... I mean...
How did you feel when they then said, we're going to do it under young adult? Was there a tiny bit of you that didn't know much about young adult at the stage, or were you kind of cool with it?
I just went, shit, somebody's going to publish it? Oh my God, that's so exciting. They could have said we're doing it as a comic book and I would have found a way to make that good news. I think because my daughter's an English teacher, my sister's now a principal, was an English teacher, my niece is an English teacher, I was aware that young adult books are actually terrific books. Yeah. I've read quite a few myself now, and some of the best writing going on right now is young adult writing.
Well, isn't it the case with like all the young adult books where everyone's on the tram and they sell a cover for kids, but then they sell a cover for adults, so grown-ups don't feel embarrassed doing it? It's just clearly just a good book.
It's just a good rollicking read. There can be a bit of sort of pretentiousness in some adult books. The great thing about young adult is they're often not at all. They're very rollicking yarns, straightforward stories, engaging to the reader, a kind of old-fashioned way of telling a tale.
Takes the pressure off of having to be coming up with some amazing literary fiction.
Which I was never going to be any good at. I'm a storyteller, not an artiste.
Do women do like better in young adult? Do they find more of a market there, do you think, than they would in literary fiction? Is literary fiction more viewed sometimes by people as a man's domain? Because otherwise it's chick lit.
Yeah, it's chick lit. I know it's deeply irritating, isn't it? I think J.K. Rowling's done rather well in young adult.
But in adult, she had to go under the name Robert.
That's right, exactly. So. It's interesting, isn't it? So I think there are a few exceptions. There's the Toni Morrisons and the Margaret Atwoods and people like that who are...
Toni, so she's again pretending to be a man. No, she's not.
Who are, like superstars. But yeah, there's an absolute tendency for men to see male subjects, male authors, male literature as more important, more serious than female. That's talked about all the time, that the low representation of women in prizes for writing and all that kind of thing. So yes, I think that it's very easy to argue that. There are, of course, some very good male young adult writers as well.
Yeah. Well, when did the first Just a Girl is the first book of the trilogy, or hopefully the trilogy, if you guys go up the back and buy some books at the end of this. It's the first book of the trilogy. When it came out, was that 2013? 14?
2011, I think.
2011, wow.
Yeah. It took me a long time to write the second one.
Well, you just made it good. With Just a Girl, then, were you surprised at the response that people had, or did you kind of anticipate that it would be?
Oh, God, no. I mean, I think it's one of the most terrifying things in the world to put... I'd written non-fiction before. Non-fiction's not that scary because if somebody gives you a bad review or says they don't like it, you just think, well, that's because you don't agree with it, because you've got a different opinion, so that's fine, you're just an idiot. So that's kind of easy to deal with. But when you write fiction, it's so much riskier because if somebody doesn't like it, and I've had bad reviews, of course I had, it's you do sort of think, I put my heart and soul into that. That's my... it's not an opinion, it's my tale. So I had no idea how people were going to respond. I just put it out there and sort of ducked. What's going to happen? And fortunately, a great many people seemed to really like it. And a lot of young people liked it too, which was really great. I will never forget one young woman, Melbourne Writers Festival, probably was 2011, or maybe 2012, and she was a tiny little thing. Maybe she was small for her age, but she was tiny. And she said to me, she stood up and she asked this question. She said, "Did you realise that you'd rewritten the Cinderella story?" And I went, "Oh my God, No, but you're absolutely right. It is a rewrite of the Cinderella story. The difference is that Cinderella had to be rescued by the prince. Elizabeth is her own prince. She rescues herself.
That's beautiful. It's a little bit like Frozen as well. That's like they start.
Yeah, it is.
Which they stole from you, clearly. It only came out a year ago.
Yeah, I'm suing Disney. But this little tiny girl, maybe she was 6th class, maybe she was year 7, I don't know. And she just opened the door for me. And that kind of response from a reader is just wonderful. I had another young man, and he was very unimpressed at a high school visit. And he's sitting up the back with his arms folded. You can always see them in the audience. He's going,
Tyson,
yeah,
have you got
exactly.
a question?
Oh, I reckon his name
What do I have to be
his
here?
name was Jai or Jared. And he said, finally puts his hand up. I thought, holy shit, Jared's asking a question. And he said, you say this book's all about Elizabeth I, but it's really about you, isn't it?
Ooh, Jared holding a mirror up to the author.
I could only do one thing and say, yeah.
Well, how do you put yourself in that story, do you think?
Well, it's about the sorts of stories that I wanted to read when I was a girl, what I want to read now, the sort of image that I want to see presented to the world about women wielding power, which we very rarely see. We still tend to see the Hillary Clinton demonised as soon as she, tries to take the top job. Yeah. When she's 2IC, when she's funky Secretary of State, we love her. Yeah. That support me to the president. Well done, Hill. But as soon as they want to be number one, heinous bitch. Julia Gillard, everybody loved her when she was
a lovely redhead that also did not have too long a reign.
No, that's right. Well, Elizabeth had 45 solid years.
But Elizabeth didn't have Kevin Rudd. She may have had a guillotine, but there was no Kevin Rudd around.
She had Mary Queen of Scots, pretty damn close. And Julia Gillard, popular as Deputy Prime Minister, as soon as she wants the number one job, hated. So there's a real theme around this. And I wanted to say, here's someone who had the number one job, who was female, who did it really well.
At the end, when Elizabeth's reign's finally over, how long did it take the English people to kind of go, and back to women as chattel?
No time at all. It's really quite interesting.
Because I don't get how you could literally spend 45 years with a strong, powerful queen that takes you from a cultural and geographic backwater to being one of the most powerful nations in the world, or the most powerful kingdoms in the world. And at the end of that reign, you go, she must have just been some kind of genetic freak. I don't know. The rest of the women seem pretty average. Yeah,
I think there was a bit of that attitude that she was a kind of bizarre aberration. I think there's something really important about her being a virgin. I've often thought that when the Catholic religion went from England, they lost the figure of the Virgin Mary, who replaced the Virgin Queen. It's quite a kind of an interesting transition. And I think that the fact that she was not sexual, not because she was a virgin, not sexual.
Or sexualised, I would imagine.
Sexualised, exactly. Kind of isolated her from that view of women as sinners and bearers of children and close to the earth and a bit like animals, that very kind of, that self-disgust misogynistic societies often have about the sexual act and birth and all that idea of the unclean, the contaminated.
I think it's quite reasonable to ask them to just go away for the 7 days. And then when it's over, they can come. No, that's right. A Bible reference where they would put the women out into a hut for 7 days. And it's
really hard to find out what they did with periods at that time. There's no information. Really interesting.
Did you make an effort to look?
Yeah. I tried to research how they dealt with their period, because she's a virgin. She's going to be having a goddamn periods. And I'm thinking to myself, she's running business meetings with the Privy Council. She can't just stop history when she's menstruating. How's she dealing with this? And I write a chapter about,
I love the idea of you sitting there trying to figure out how to give her PMS or something.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's in the book. You can read all about it. And I found out what they call the rags, as they call them, the linen that they used as kind of pads, wallops, which is interesting, isn't it? It's a wallop is what it was called. But
you learn something new every day.
That's right, but that took some digging up. The interesting thing, though, about what happened after she died is that James I's reign So he takes over. He's a gay man, as a matter of fact, which is interesting. But he's
the name that's stamped on all the Bibles.
Yeah,
King James.
King James Bible. That's right, which is a brilliant document. But he was a gay
that,
man.
homophobes.
He was a gay man, James I, no question at all. But that was the time when the pogroms against witches were at their height in Britain and also in the early years of the colonies in America, Salem.
So that didn't happen. So that literally happens just after Elizabeth died. Yep. She didn't have any kind of.
No, they had a real view about witches and witchcraft, but no, there weren't the pogroms. There wasn't the witch hunting that really became very kind of popular, if you can call it that, just during the reign of James I. I think that's really interesting, and I don't think it's coincidental.
No.
I think
a lot of powerful, knowledgeable women being put in their place.
Literally killed often. And I think that was a reassertion of masculine power. I'm sure it was unconscious. I don't think they went, right, we're going to get those bitches by calling them witches. But I think unconsciously it readjusted the balance back in favour of the men.
You are, as I mentioned at the beginning, you're a Republican. Do you have any vague interest in the royal family as we know them now? And regardless of whether you do or you don't, is there anyone that you think could be remotely compared to Elizabeth I? And I guess probably the most obvious sort of comparison to draw would be with her namesake, Elizabeth II, who's had also a hugely long reign. What do you think do they have in common, and what do you think they're very dissimilar with?
Okay, look, I am a Republican, but I'm a Republican for Australia.
Yeah.
I'm not a Republican for Britain. I think it would be devastating to lose the monarchy in Britain because they've had it for so long and it's such a link with the past.
But couldn't you say that about the patriarchy? We've had it for so long and it seems a shame to give it up. Such a good tradition.
You could, but I wouldn't.
Yeah.
But I do think that having this constant family going through, there's something about it that I think is really amazing. But I'm not sure they should be paid the amount of money they're paid on the civil lifts and all of that. That's very different.
They can just do what everyone else does and sell their interviews to OK Magazine.
Correct.
And then they make money to get by.
Elizabeth, it's really interesting though. Elizabeth I is the third longest ruling monarch, 45 years. Queen Victoria is now the second longest ruling monarch at 60 years. Queen Elizabeth II will be the longest ever ruling monarch at she's already at 61 years, I think, now. And she looks like she's going on for some time yet. But they are the three women.
That's crazy.
Yeah. George III reigned on and off for about the same amount of time, but he went mad periodically, and so there was a regency. So it doesn't count in the same way as the women. But it is...
I love that. And they say that we're moody bitches.
Oh, yeah.
Can't run a nation.
I do think the only person who's similar to Elizabeth I in any way is Elizabeth II, but they're a constitutional monarchy now. Yeah. They're all about cutting ribbons and, saying you're all doing very well. And
she's had to do, I guess I would say, some wise decisions, and there's a lot of thought and calculation, I think, in everything that she does. I would say, even if it's as small as, very, very small, tiny things. I don't think there's anything that they would do that she doesn't consider very carefully before she does it. And I guess in that sense, she might be very similar.
I think she has the same discipline. I think she's a very disciplined person. I think she knows what her job is and she applies her intelligence to it and she takes it very seriously. And I think in that there is a similarity. I do have a slight obsession with Princess Diana.
Do you?
Yeah, because she was bonkers.
Yeah, I'm thinking to myself, not for the same reasons that you admire Elizabeth I, surely.
No, except she really shoved it up the royal family, and that's pretty cool, I think. Whereas, but Kate Middleton's so bland.
She gave us a princess, so I think you're an ingrate. I don't really mean that at all.
Did she give us a princess?
Very
generous of her.
She did give us one. I just got the latest copy of Australian Women's Weekly, and it's definitely for us.
It's for us. Oh.
Hello, Jane. I've been a big fan of yours since the Serious Women's Business Conference a few years ago. But our teenage reading sounds really similar. And I did read Pride and Prejudice at 16, and it was really good. The fact that Elizabeth wouldn't go to bed when she was dying, do you see that as really part of her personality? And it was really well encapsulated by the Glenda Jackson.
The finger in her mouth.
Yeah, just watching her there for so long. Do you think that was really part of her personality, and that she just was not going to give away this thing that she'd worked for so long?
I think she was a very stubborn and determined person, and I think she did what she needed to do. And I think she needed at that time, and this is my interpretation, and of course volume 3, if I do it, is going to be those 6 days where she sat and she's going to be thinking back over her whole life. I think she needed that time to let herself go from life, and she didn't want to be in a weak position in bed being ministered to by doctors, because the doctors were horrendous. You know, you really didn't want to go anywhere near them. So I think by sitting on the cushion on the ground and sucking her finger, she didn't speak. She kept everyone at bay. So in a way, she took charge of the manner of her going, and she only went to bed at the very, very end. A bit like, there's a similar story about Emily Bronte, you know, refusing to go to bed when she's dying. She, you know, eventually agrees to lie on a couch just before she dies. That same kind of inexorable personality. They will do, and they won't lose dignity. And I think for her, and I think she's in that process of detaching from life. She found herself on a cushion, the finger was a comfort, and everybody else around her were fading because she was leaving the world. My conceit, if I get to write the 3rd volume, is that she will, because by that time all her peers are dead. All the courtiers are much younger. Some of them are the sons of her old friends who she'd seen die, and she went and sat by their deathbeds, and, you know, these were her people. No, she didn't kill Lester. Essex, his stepson. Yes, because he just richly deserved it, really. But I think her feeling is that there's no one left who is of her generation, and that everyone's thinking, when will this old bat just die and bring back the bloke? You know, they're all looking to Scotland. She always said it is the nature of men to pay more attention to the rising sun than the setting one. And so I think that's that period. I find it intensely moving that she sat there and sucked her. And her life's so well documented. Everything is recorded.
Thank you, Jane. You're such a breath of fresh air and a great thinker. It's wonderful to have you. Just a quick comment and then a question. The Mary Virgin, Elizabeth Virgin, her clothing is a lot like the South American Mary Guadalupe, and at the time it was the Spanish. So it was actually, if you look at the South American pictures of Mary Virgin, they're very similar to her.
Oh, that's interesting.
So you might want to look at that. Was she really a virgin? And if so, how did she do the contraception?
Well, she was definitely a virgin. For that very reason, there was no contraception, or no safe contraception. I think there's no doubt at all she was a virgin. It was just too risky not to be. I'm not saying she didn't indulge in a bit of what we used to call heavy petting when I was a girl.
This discussion about Elizabeth I just took a turn that I could not have anticipated. Let's talk about the heavy petting.
Well, I'm not saying... But the thing was, she was also never alone. They were never alone. So when she went to bed at night, there was a lady sleeping in the truckle bed at the end of her bed. So that's the whole point, that her virginity was very important. It could not be impugned at all. It had to be clear, because a single woman had only her reputation. That's all she had. She came very close to losing that reputation with her stepfather, Thomas Seymour, who took immense liberties with her when she was living with him and her stepmother, Catherine Parr. And I think she learned very early on, she was about 13 when that happened. It's very close to child sexual abuse from our eyes now. I think she learned very early on when that happened that this was too risky. She could not indulge that side of her personality. So, and I also think that, quite frankly, even if she'd been really tempted, I think she was tempted. I think she was quite a lusty person, and I think she loved Robert Dudley, and I think, yes, she would have loved to. And then again, she really didn't. I think she liked the game. She liked the sort of catch me if you can, no, you're never going to catch me. I think she loved that. One of the most interesting episodes is her last possibility of being married was the Duke of Anjou. And he was 17 years younger than she was. He was about 7 inches shorter than she was. She wasn't, but he was quite lively and he was quite attractive. But the person she really enjoyed was his representative, Simier, who she could flirt with safely because it was for proxy for his master, so they could muck around and be flirtatious and say all sorts of risque things to one another without it ever coming to any kind of dangerous point. I think the father cutting the mother's head off really changed her idea about what it was to lose your virginity. I think she was definitely a virgin. I don't think there's any doubt about it. I know, it's the first question, and for modern people, they just think, it's almost the most subversive thing these days. You could have any kind of hot sex you wanted in an adult book now. That'd be fine. No one would turn a hair. But to write a book about a virgin, her whole life, now that's weird.
We've got someone down the front.
Down the front.
Thank you, Jane. I'm interested in your thoughts about what place sadness had in Elizabeth's life once she became a powerful queen.
I think she was deeply, I don't know if she was sad, she was melancholy on occasion. I think she was very lonely. I think it was very hard to be a woman in that situation surrounded by ambitious men, even though I think she was an incredibly good hirer. She hired a few men and they were never fired. They worked together for decades and they were very close and they had a good relationship. And I think she was a good boss. But I think she was very isolated. She was very different from any of her female peers. She had good female friends. She had her ladies, of course, all the way through her reign. And she had Cat Ashley, her governess. But I think isolation and loneliness seemed to mark her life. That was the sacrifice, in a way, she made for power. We still talk about women not being able to have it all, which just simply means marriage and family and a career, which, interestingly enough, is about the least men expect out of life. But for us, that's considered greedy beyond belief. And she really had to give up the marriage and family for the career. That's exactly what she did. And I think it was a better choice than the other way around, but it didn't come without its price. And I'm sure she knew that she was paying the price. She writes poems about paying the price.
Hi, Jane. What was her relationship with Shakespeare like, and why didn't he take her on as a subject?
Interesting. She is around at the fairly early beginnings of Shakespeare's career. So his most productive year is 1599, in which he wrote Hamlet. I can't remember the other two, but he wrote 3 classic plays in one year, which is kind of regarded as his pinnacle year. She was dead by 1601. So, and he was in the King's plays, is the famous, and that's King James. So he was a much more prolific and well-known playwright under James than he was under Elizabeth. It's very late in her reign that he is a playwright then, though he certainly performed in front of her. I think Twelfth Night was performed in front of Elizabeth. I don't think she really had a relationship with him. I think he was a playwright and an entrepreneur and an impresario, and she probably thought his plays were all very well, but he was lowly. I mean, he wasn't... He at that time would not have been regarded with the kind of veneration that we regard him now. He was just a player manager. Oh yes, that Mr. Shakespeare's very amusing. Well, now, has Mr. Fowler done something? Has Mr. Marlowe? They were all just entertainers. So I doubt they had a real relationship. And he would not have written about. He wrote plays very much oriented towards the Tudors and Tudor propaganda, Richard III, for example, because Elizabeth's grandfather had usurped the throne from Richard III. We forget that about the Tudors, that they were very shaky on their throne, hence the obsession with an heir and a son for Henry, because he was just one generation from a usurper, a man who had literally taken the crown from another king on Bosworth Field. So they were an upstart monarchy, dynasty.
Nouveau royal.
Yeah, nouveau royal. Very good. Red brick royals. They so I think, and literally actually Tudor brick is red, isn't it? So I think she was. He wrote plays that he knew would please her and would not get him into trouble.
It's obvious because she's a woman and she's probably, not as interested. But he had her as an
Well,
inspiration.
I think James I didn't want any veneration of Elizabeth anymore. She was still referred to as Good Queen Bess. She and Henry. So when Elizabeth and Mary were around, it was Good King Hal. The ordinary people of England loved Henry VIII. They thought he was terrific. She was very, very popular, incredibly popular, and very aware of holding her popularity. And I think James I didn't want references to Elizabeth when he came to the throne. That reign is over. Now, if you're going to write anything at all, you're going to write about me and men and rule by men, not that old woman. Forget about her.
Right, well, look, it's 7:15, so I think that means that it's about time for us to wrap this up. This was a really awesome beginning to the You Don't Know Me series. You've raised the bar very high, Jane. Could you please put your hands together for Jane Caro? What a wonderful guest.